No one in that room knew who he really was. Not the thug standing front and center. Not the crowd watching with half-interested eyes. Not even the man laughing the loudest. Certain he was in control. All they saw was a small, quiet Asian man standing calmly in the corner. He wasn't loud. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to look tough. His posture was relaxed. His face was neutral. His presence almost invisible. To most people in that room he looked ordinary, harmless, someone easy to ignore. And that was the mistake. What they didn't know, what not a single person there could have imagined, was that they were looking at Bruce Lee. Not the movie star, not the legend, but the fighter. The man who had spent his life studying speed, timing, and control. The man who believed that true power didn't need noise. The man who understood that violence was never the goal, only the last option. When one thug decided to humiliate him in public, it wasn't because Bruce had done anything wrong. It was because the thug thought he was safe, because he judged strength by size, because he believed loud confidence meant dominance. He stepped forward with a joke, a shove, a laugh meant to draw attention. The crowd reacted the way crowds usually do. Some smiled awkwardly. Some looked away, some waited, curious to see how the quiet man would respond. No one expected anything remarkable. No one expected danger. But in that moment, when the insult landed, when the line was crossed, everything changed. Not with shouting, not with threats, not with chaos, but with a level of speed and control so precise, so sudden, that it would leave everyone questioning what they thought they understood about strength. Because the most dangerous people in the room are rarely the loudest ones. They're the ones who stay calm. Until calm is no longer an option. Have you ever seen someone mistaken for weak, only to realize too late? It was an ordinary evening, the kind of night that blends into 100 others, a crowded place filled with noise, movement, and easy confidence. Loud voices bounced off the walls, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell in uneven waves. Nothing about the room suggested danger. People leaned in close to hear one another. Friends joked over drinks. Strangers brushed past without a second glance. In the middle of it all stood Bruce Lee, not at the center, not elevated, not drawing attention. He stood quietly among the people, dressed simply, his posture relaxed, his movements economical. There was no tension in his shoulders, no stiffness in his stance. He wasn't scanning the room. He wasn't sizing anyone up. He looked like someone passing time, someone waiting. Someone with nowhere urgent to be. Bruce wasn't seeking attention. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He had no need to. To anyone watching casually, he appeared unremarkable. Around him, the room continued its rhythm. People talked freely, unaware of anything unusual. Some laughed too loudly. Some spoke with exaggerated confidence. Others drifted from one conversation to the next, carried by the energy of the crowd. Near the bar, a group of tough-looking men gathered together. They were louder than everyone else. Their voices carried over the music. Their laughter was sharp, aggressive, designed to dominate the space around them. Leather jackets, heavy boots, wide stances. They fed off one another's presence, each man amplifying the confidence of the next. They took up space deliberately. They wanted to be seen. They wanted to be felt. People noticed them and adjusted. Some stepped aside. Some lowered their voices. Some avoided eye contact altogether. That was the unspoken rule of places like this. Noise equals power. Size equals authority. And by that logic, Bruce Lee barely registered. He didn't match their volume. He didn't mirror their posture. He didn't challenge their presence. He stood there calmly, almost detached, as if the noise passed through him without effect. To everyone watching, Bruce looked harmless. Too calm, too small, too quiet. The kind of person people overlook without thinking twice, the kind of person others assume will move aside. That assumption, that quiet means weak, is one of the oldest and most dangerous misunderstandings humans make. Because calm does not come from lack of strength. Often, it comes from mastery. Bruce's stillness wasn't emptiness. It was restraint. His relaxed posture wasn't ignorance. It was awareness without tension. He had spent years learning how to move without wasted effort, how to breathe without panic, how to remain present without reacting. While others filled the room with noise, Bruce carried silence like a shield. And silence, when misunderstood, invites testing. The loudest men in the room often believe volume is dominance. They believe fear is respect. They believe intimidation is strength. They don't look for discipline. They don't recognize control. They don't understand what it means when someone doesn't feel the need to prove anything. That's why situations like this become dangerous. Not because of bad intentions at first, but because of misjudgment. The normal world lulls people into false confidence. It convinces them that nothing will challenge them tonight, that they can push boundaries without consequence. And when someone like Bruce Lee exists quietly within that space, unnoticed, unacknowledged, unprovoked, he becomes a blank screen for others to project their assumptions onto. Weak, passive, safe to disrespect. That illusion doesn't come from Bruce's size or silence. It comes from the way society teaches people to measure power. Most people judge strength by what they can see and hear. Muscle, noise, aggression. They rarely notice discipline. They rarely recognize control. They almost never respect silence. And that is why moments like this matter. Because the calm before a confrontation isn't peaceful. It's deceptive. Everything feels normal. Everything feels under control. Until someone decides to test the wrong person. And when that happens, the illusion breaks. It started the way moments like this usually do. Not with rage, not with shouting, but with curiosity mixed with arrogance. One of the thugs noticed Bruce. At first, it was just a glance. A quick look up and down, the kind of assessment people make without realizing it. The thug's eyes lingered for a second longer than necessary. Then he smirked. There was no reason for it. No provocation, no challenge. Just the quiet confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to him. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, making sure others noticed. His presence was loud even before he spoke. And then he decided to make a joke. A careless remark, a line meant to draw laughter. Not clever. Just cruel enough to humiliate. The shove came next. Not a punch. Not a strike. Just enough contact to test boundaries. Just enough to see how the quiet man would respond. The thug laughed as he did it, expecting laughter in return. A few people nearby chuckled nervously. Not because it was funny, but because laughter sometimes feels safer than silence. Others looked away, suddenly interested in their drinks or their phones. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to be seen. A few people stopped moving altogether, sensing something shift beneath the surface. Bruce didn't react. No flinch. No tightening of the jaw. No instinctive step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at the thug, not with anger, not with fear, but with a calm gaze, steady, focused, unreadable. It wasn't a stare meant to intimidate. It wasn't a challenge. It was awareness, and that made the thug uncomfortable. Silence has a way of doing that. When someone doesn't respond the way you expect, it forces you to confront your own uncertainty. But instead of recognizing that uncertainty, the thug misinterpreted it. He mistook calm for weakness, stillness for fear, control for submission. That misunderstanding gave him confidence, so he pushed again, harder this time. The contact was no longer accidental, no longer playful. It was deliberate. The room reacted instantly. The laughter died. The noise softened, conversations paused, mid-sentence. People felt it before they fully understood it. The atmosphere changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but unmistakably. The space between Bruce and the thug felt heavier, thicker. Even the people who weren't watching directly sensed something was wrong. Bruce remained still, but something in his posture shifted, subtle enough that most wouldn't notice. A redistribution of weight, a grounding, not preparation for violence, but readiness. The thug noticed this too, though he didn't understand it. He took the stillness as permission, as encouragement. He leaned in closer, invading Bruce's space, trying to provoke a reaction. In his mind, this was how power worked. You push, you provoke, you dominate. And if the other person doesn't respond, you push harder. What he didn't realize was that Bruce wasn't avoiding conflict. He was measuring it. Every movement, every breath. every intention. Bruce had spent his life understanding human motion, understanding balance, understanding how emotion reveals itself through the body. He wasn't frozen, he was present. The room held its breath. No one said anything. No one stepped in. Because moments like this create an unspoken question. Who is really in control? And that question doesn't get answered with noise. It gets answered with the next move. That second shove wasn't just physical. It was a declaration. A line drawn without realizing how close it was to the edge. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The room had changed, not because of what had happened, but because of what was about to happen. Have you ever seen someone push too far? Simply because they believed the other person wouldn't fight back. Bruce took a slow breath, not because he was afraid, but because breath is where control begins. In moments like this, most people react before they think. Their bodies move faster than their judgment. Emotion takes the lead, and consequences follow. Bruce had trained himself to do the opposite. He didn't want trouble. He never did. To him, fighting was never entertainment. Never a way to prove superiority. It was a last resort, a failure of communication, a breakdown of discipline. Every strike carried responsibility. Every movement had meaning, and until this moment, there had been no need to act. But there was a line. There is always a line, a point where patience stops being wisdom and becomes permission. That line isn't drawn by ego, it isn't drawn by pride. It's drawn by respect. And that line had just been crossed. The shove wasn't the issue. Physical contact alone didn't demand retaliation. What mattered was intention. The deliberate choice to humiliate. The decision to invade space. The willingness to escalate simply because silence was mistaken for weakness. Bruce understood something most people never consider. When aggression goes unchecked, it grows. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It signals acceptance. This moment wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone in the room. Bruce didn't need validation. He didn't need witnesses. This was about self-respect, and about setting a boundary that could no longer remain unspoken. Bruce felt the shift internally before anything changed on the outside. His posture adjusted, almost imperceptibly. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing. A casual movement, a minor adjustment of weight. But to someone who understood combat, it meant everything. His feet grounded more firmly, his balance centered, his body aligned. This wasn't preparation fueled by anger. It was alignment fueled by clarity. He wasn't deciding how to fight. He was deciding whether to act. That decision carried weight. Bruce believed violence should end conflict, not create it. He believed speed should serve control, not chaos. He believed power should be precise, not reckless. That belief created hesitation, not weakness but responsibility. He measured the space, the distance, the energy of the room. He sensed the tension in the crowd, the uncertainty, the way people were waiting for someone else to decide how this would end. Bruce knew that once he moved, there would be no undoing it. There would be no second chance at restraint. This is what separates trained fighters from impulsive ones. Untrained people rush. They let emotion choose their timing. True fighters pause. They understand that the moment of decision is more important than the moment of action. Because once the decision is made, the outcome is already written. Bruce's face remained calm. No anger crossed it. No excitement. No fear, just focus. He wasn't thinking about the thug. He wasn't thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about responsibility. How to stop the situation without escalating it. How to protect without punishing. How to end the moment with as little harm as possible. That is a difficult choice, especially when you know you have the ability to cause damage. Restraint is hardest when you are capable. Bruce shifted his stance slightly again. Not a threat, not a display, just readiness. A quiet signal to himself that the decision was nearly made. The room felt heavier now. People sensed it without understanding why. The calm had changed not into chaos, but into something sharper. A stillness that demanded respect. Bruce was no longer avoiding the moment. He was meeting it. On his terms, true fighters don't rush, they decide. And once they do, the outcome is already settled. The thug laughed again. Not nervously, not uncertainly. This time it was louder, sharper, meant to reassert control. "What are you gonna do?" he sneered. The words weren't a question, they were a challenge. He leaned forward slightly, invading Bruce's space once more. His body language said what his mouth didn't. "You won't do anything." He raised his fist not yet to strike, but high enough to threaten, high enough to test. He was expecting fear, expecting hesitation, expecting Bruce to flinch, to step back, to apologize. That's how these moments usually end. But what he didn't expect, what no one in the room expected, was speed. In less than a second, Bruce moved. There was no warning. No visible build-up, no dramatic wind-up. One moment he was standing still. The next, the space between them collapsed. Not wildly, not aggressively, precisely. Bruce's movement was clean and economical. No wasted motion, no excess force, a subtle shift of balance, a redirection of energy, a strike delivered with perfect timing. To the untrained eye, it almost didn't make sense. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was efficient. The thug felt it before he understood it. His breath vanished. Not from pain, but from shock. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He stumbled backward, feet scrambling for balance, eyes wide with confusion. The confidence that had fueled him seconds earlier drained instantly. The laughter stopped, completely. The room went silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if sound itself had been switched off. People froze mid-motion. Hands hovered over glasses. Phones stopped moving. No one spoke. No one breathed loudly. Everyone was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Bruce stood exactly where he had been, not advancing, not retreating, calm, controlled, untouched. His posture hadn't changed. His expression hadn't hardened. There was no anger on his face. No satisfaction. Just composure. The thug bent forward slightly, trying to draw air back into his lungs. His eyes darted around, searching for support, for explanation, for something familiar. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Moments ago, he had owned the room. Now, the room didn't belong to anyone. People who had laughed earlier avoided eye contact. Those who had looked away now stared openly. Not in excitement, but in disbelief, because what they had just seen didn't match their expectations. They hadn't seen a fight. They hadn't seen chaos. They had seen control. And control is unsettling when you don't understand it. Bruce hadn't raised his voice, hadn't followed through, hadn't escalated. He had done exactly what was necessary, and nothing more. That restraint was more intimidating than any display of rage. The thug straightened slowly, unsure whether to step forward or step back. His body no longer trusted his confidence. He had challenged someone he didn't understand. And now that misunderstanding had consequences. Bruce met his eyes briefly, not with threat, not with pride, with calm awareness. A silent message passed between them. This doesn't need to go further. The room remained frozen, waiting to see if the moment would explode or dissolve. Because everyone now understood the same thing, whatever power they thought they recognized earlier had just been rewritten. Strength wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was precise, measured, decisive. And once it revealed itself, there was no arguing with it. The thug tried to recover. At first, he straightened his back, forcing himself upright as if posture alone could restore what he had lost. He rolled his shoulders, shook his arms, testing his body like a machine that suddenly wasn't responding the way it should. But his body refused to cooperate. His breathing was uneven, his balance uncertain. Not because he was injured, but because his confidence had been dismantled. He had never felt power like that before. Not brute force, not raw strength. This was something different, precision. The kind of power that doesn't overwhelm you. It removes options, the kind that doesn't chase. It ends things before they begin. For the first time, the thug wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about understanding what had just happened. Bruce took a small step forward. Not aggressively, not to threaten. Just enough to close the space and take control of the moment. His movement was calm, unhurried. There was no tension in his shoulders. no anger in his face. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. You don't need anger to end a fight. You need understanding. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed quietly and stayed. There was no challenge in his tone. No pride, just truth. The kind of truth that doesn't ask for agreement. The thug froze. He wasn't being threatened. He wasn't being mocked. He was being addressed, as if the conflict had already been resolved. That was what unsettled him most. In his world, confrontations ended with dominance, with someone standing over someone else. But here, there was no victory pose. No follow-up strike, just calm authority. Around them, the room stayed silent. No one else stepped forward. No one laughed. No one spoke. The energy had shifted completely. People who had once been relaxed now stood still, watching, absorbing what they were witnessing. They weren't watching violence. They were watching restraint. They were watching a man who could continue, but chose not to. That choice carried more weight than any blow. The thug took a half step back, not from fear, but from recognition. He finally understood what everyone else was beginning to see. This man was not weak. He was restrained. There is a difference few people recognize until it's too late. Weakness avoids conflict because it fears consequences. Restraint avoids conflict because it understands them. Bruce wasn't calm because he lacked ability. He was calm because he had mastered it. He had nothing to prove, nothing to gain from escalation. His presence alone now set the boundary. The crowd felt it. Even those who didn't fully understand martial arts or combat sensed something deeper at work. They sensed certainty, the kind that doesn't demand attention, the kind that settles a room. No one challenged it. No one questioned it. Because authority, when genuine, doesn't need reinforcement. The thug lowered his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in acceptance. The situation was over, not because someone lost, but because someone decided it should end. Bruce stepped back to his original position. The space between them reopened, but it no longer felt unstable. It felt resolved. The room exhaled. People began to shift again, but quietly now, carefully, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. What they had just seen wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. And real power rarely looks the way people expect. The most dangerous people aren't loud. They're quiet. Because they don't need to prove anything. The thug backed away. Not dramatically. Not angrily, just a step slow, uncertain. Like someone realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. His confidence was gone. The loud posture that once filled the room collapsed inward. His shoulders lowered. His eyes avoided contact. Everyone could see it. Bruce didn't follow him, didn't watch him leave. He simply turned and walked away. No celebration. No ego. No applause. Just silence. That silence said more than any reaction ever could. People stood still as Bruce passed them, instinctively giving him space. Not out of fear, but out of respect. No one reached for their phone anymore. No one whispered. The moment had already ended. Later, long after Bruce had disappeared into the crowd, the room slowly returned to life. Glasses were lifted again. Conversations restarted. But something had changed. People spoke more quietly now, more thoughtfully. Because what they had witnessed stayed with them. They would talk about it later. Not in excited voices, not with exaggerated gestures, but with disbelief, not because of violence, but because of control. They wouldn't describe punches or movements. They would describe how fast it ended, how calm it was, how nothing escalated further. They would say things like, "I've never seen anything like that." He didn't even look angry. It was over before it started. And that's how moments like this spread. Not as stories of brutality, but as reminders. Reminders that strength doesn't always announce itself. That power doesn't need noise, that the most capable people in the room are often the ones you don't notice at all. That night became a lesson without a lecture. Never judge strength by appearance. Never mistake calm for weakness. Because silence can be a sign of restraint, not fear. Bruce didn't fight to dominate. He acted to end a situation that no longer needed words. He didn't humiliate his opponent. He didn't claim victory. He simply restored balance and walked away. That is what true discipline looks like. Some people train for years not to fight, but to understand when fighting is unnecessary. And some people don't fight often. But when they do, they end things quickly, cleanly, decisively, not because they enjoy it, but because they respect what force can do. That's why Bruce Lee remains remembered not just as a fighter, but as a philosopher of movement. A man who believed that mastery meant control over oneself first, before control over anything else. And for the people who witnessed that moment, it stayed with them, not as a memory of fear, but as a quiet reminder of what real strength looks like. If you believe true strength is discipline, not intimidation, type respect in the comments.